There's a maniac, and he's moved onto Elm Street. Here's your look at the McFarlane toys. This is the movie Maniacs Series 1, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. From the first McFarlane Toys movie Maniacs series is the monster on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger himself. Consider this a bit of a re-review, as we certainly have already had a look at the movie Maniacs Series 1, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. That's a mouthful. We're going to take the tape measure and take it to the very top of the head. The real reason, actually, why we're having a look at this figure is I got a message over on Facebook from Scott, who had asked me what would I pinpoint as being that one figure that got me collecting if I had stopped collecting at one point. And it immediately popped in my head just like that. It was movie Maniacs Series 1 Freddy Krueger. And I'm sure a bit of a short story will follow after we have a look at the figure's height, which in this case stands at 7.1 inches in height. And that in centimeters works out to be 18.1, so a little over 18. Over 18, I was going to say, I usually jump to 18 and a half, but we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there yet. You're looking at 18.1 instead, centimeters tall. So for me, I wasn't a fan of collecting toys from birth to now. There was, of course, a few little gaps of time in between that. In my childhood, of course, I was collecting things like G.I. Joes, Transformers, Visionaries, Cops, all the stuff I could really grab onto. My favorite toy line still from the 80s was G.I. Joes, but it didn't, of course, go the entire stretch of time. There was the little gaps in the middle of that where I dropped off and, of course, had other interests in mind. I was in high school, I hang around with friends, and I was partying and going and hanging around with people's houses and watching horror films and all that fun stuff. And I wasn't even in the mindset of collecting anything at that time. Come around full circle, not quite full circle because that would take us all the way back to the beginning, but take us to early 2000s. When I happened to be at Zeller's in Canada. I went down the toy aisle, which is something I don't normally do, and then I happened to stumble onto this figure here. Not specifically this figure, because I kind of wish I still had that figure, but I stumbled onto this strange line of toys called Movie Maniacs, produced by Todd McFarlane. I was familiar with Todd McFarlane from his days of producing, of course, the Spawn comic. But this was brand new to me, and I immediately picked up Freddy Krueger because I wasn't more so interested in collecting toys as I was interested in horror films. And that got the ball rolling, the proverbial ball rolling down the hill, and eventually that, of course, has led us to where we are to this day. So in some ways, an answer to Scott's question of what figure could define my starting of collecting, my collecting days now have continued to go and grow, but the figure that kind of got me interested back into collecting figure was this guy right here. Again, I kind of wish that I still had that initial figure. To make a short story long, it seems, let's move on to the accessories that come included with the figure. Now, this is the early first wave outing of Movie Maniacs, and along with that gets the fact that these stands have a much more larger, profound frame going for them. Still, though, back in the day, they have not put backings on these. So a lot of times, if you did store these away in bags, a lot of times the poor victim in all of this will be a crumpled up poster, which unfortunately this one slightly has had some damage done to it. I wish in retrospect that they could have actually put like a plastic backing to it so that you just actually you don't even have to put the poster in. It comes included when you get the figure first out of its packaging. But the artwork done really nicely here on the outer frame, comprised of skulls, fingers, I guess those are elongated fingers, spinal cords, and all the other things that would go that, of course, Todd McFarlane is all about. Specifically, I like this back section wall where it looks like there's these skulls that have been embedded into the side of the wall. The wall is made out of skulls, quite literally. The paint is minimal. It looks like they've literally just taken a more cream-colored plastic and just glossed over it with a brushing of black paint. It's certainly enough, though, that the detailings for those skulls certainly do stand out. I still like these, don't get me wrong, and I know there is talk, of course, that McFarlane Toys is planning to jumpstart, like I said, maybe perhaps in the way of Frankenstein's monster, to bring his monster back to life, the movie Maniacs. If they do plan to go that route, I would certainly love to see them come back with these display stands in tow, because I think that was one of the things that made this line stand out. We never really got much in the way of Freddy Krueger's up to that point, of this size, of course. And of course, along with that was the calling card that came included with these movie Maniac pieces. And that was, like I said, this bone-framed kind of standee for a poster. I always thought that was really neat. So we're going to put that to the side because we've, again, we've looked at that before. The other thing to come included with Freddy Krueger here, and sort of telling us now what movie this is from. This is from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors, which is ironic because when you look at, again, the display stand would tell you that this is Freddy Krueger from the original film, which sort of debunks a lot of that because he does also have stripes in his sleeves. We'll talk about that in a second as well. Now, this is the Marionette Freddy that, of course, would appear in A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. And just to kind of give you a comparison, because I was going to do a couple of comparisons of these, this is the one that came included with the NECA's Ultimate release of Freddy Krueger from the same title. I just want to show you how one does change. This is the past. This is sort of the grandfather to the newer generation of horror toys. And you got to admit, though, I mean, even for how old these are, this is, of course, a better-looking sculpt figure. But to think that back in the day, Todd McFarlane and his team would have decided for an accessory, hey, why not? Why don't we just hand-pick the Marionette from, granted, yes, a different Nightmare on Elm Street film, but it's neat the fact that they would have actually included it. This guy is quite dark in the fact that they've covered him completely in this oil-slicked paint. This makes quite an appearance when we have a look at Freddy Krueger here, but it's more importantly something certainly to notice and mention here with the Marionette. He does have some posability, which is good. You can rotate the arms all the way around, and you can also, I think you can rotate the head back and forth. Maybe not. This one, I thought at one point the original toy you might have been able to. Maybe there's just so much paint going on in there that I can't actually move the head. So it's just, again, a nice little trinket to come included with Freddy Krueger. Certainly they could have just left it off in its entirety and just given us the display stand poster, but I like the fact that they actually do give you something like this. He has a real difficulty of standing, though. I mean, he's wide-stanced, but he doesn't have a display stand to come included with him. So, unfortunately, a lot of times, poor Marionette Freddy will just tumble and fall forward. Anyways, we'll put the figure to the side, that little accessory to the side, and we'll have a look at Freddy Krueger, which I know, again, we've had a look at this figure before. All the more reasoning, again, I wanted to look at this guy again. A lot of talking points, and certainly I could go down memory lane. I won't do that for the sake of boring you guys, but this was certainly the figure that brought things to life for me when it came to collecting in my older years. Now, again, I want to show you guys some comparisons. I do want to also stress, I'm not going to do comparisons side to side and say this one is inferior, this one is superior. I sound like Soundwave, but there is what the McFarlane release of the movie Maniacs Freddy would have looked like stacked up next to his familiar film counterpart, in the sense if you are looking at the two Marionette Freddys, you would pinpoint the Dream Warriors as your movie of choice. This is what McFarlane was releasing, this one here, and this one was what NECA was releasing many, many years later. Obviously, it's a night and day difference. Boy, Freddy looks more like a husk. He looks like a dry shell made out of a tree. But still, for the time that these came out, it would be impossible for me to compare this one to this one and say that the NECA one is superior because, well, there was a lot of years in between the two. This one came out really early into my adulthood, and this one just recently came out, I want to say, within the last 5 years or so. I'm going to move that one to the side because, again, the whole review isn't about it. But looking at Freddy Krueger, the thing about the McFarlane movie Maniacs is that you could pick up 5 different Freddys. Same mold, yes, but pick up 5 different ones in packaging, and it seems like you would have a different paint scheme with each one of them. They're unique as snowflakes, even though that's not technically true. Science has debunked that. But the dark coloring seems very unique to this one. If I had literally bought another Freddy and put them side by side, you would definitely see that this one just happened to be forfeited, I guess, some additional coloring in favor of more of just a black wash of oil slick that's just been all over his sweater. My original Freddy figure didn't have this. And again, if I was to pick up another couple of Freddys, you would see that the paint does change from one figure to the next. I think I got to believe at the time that this was being produced, these were all probably being hand painted. And I don't think there was a consistency that, yes, the reds had to be a certain color, the greens had to be a certain color. Instead, the one I picked up off of eBay just so happens to give me a Freddy Krueger that looks like he's been bathing in oil. One interesting thing as well about this particular figure is that I've got green running down the sides. And I got to believe that that, again, was just an error on the painter's part, the fact that that green is actually there. I'm not even sure why that is there, because it doesn't make appearances anywhere else on the figure. It kind of looks like he's covered in slime. Looking at the face sculpt, though, as primitive as it must be, I'm sure to look at that now, you got to give some mad props to McFarlane Toys for producing these figures well ahead of the curve when other companies were doing horror collectibles. Yes, he is a little more basic. Yes, he doesn't really seem to have much rhyme or reason to the sculpting on his face. It looks less like burns, and it quite literally looks like somebody just kind of took like a sharp tool and just carved little slots in it, little gashes. He kind of, again, looks like he's made out of a tree, like the bark of the tree, if you look real close at it. I mean, the eyes are good. I like that there's some yellow eyes and you got some visible teeth there, as discolored as they may seem. This particular Freddy doesn't have also a removable fedora. That doesn't get something that is given to him until the second release of Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street and movie Maniacs, because the later Freddy did, I feel, did have the removable fedora, and I feel was a better looking Freddy Krueger. That's still one of my favorites in my collection. I'm going to have to see where I can find that one. So other than, yes, he is very, very dark in color scheme. He, of course, has his glove, which unfortunately over the time that I've collected this guy, the years that I've stored him away, his glove blades have become a little warped. They're quite generously soaked in blood, which is, again, something that McFarlane Toys was doing with a lot of their pieces. They were giving us regular store-sellable ones that didn't have as much the coloring of blood splattered all over them. And then there were the blood-splattered, which you often didn't find in retail stores. You would have to go to specialty stores. You'd have to go to comic book stores to find those. I got so obsessed with this line at one point. Not only was I collecting the regular variants, and I'm sure many other McFarlane collectors out there could probably agree to this, I started collecting the regular figures, then I started moving into the variant figures, and then I also started finding figures that were slightly different altogether. They were still the regular retail releases, but they had different looking paint jobs, which I think this Freddy Krueger could easily have fallen into that category. He is very staction. He's pre-posed. There's very little in the way of posability for this guy. If we get a close-up look at his pants, for example, we have this cross-hatching, which really doesn't make any sense for Freddy's pants. They kind of look like they're made out of corduroy when obviously he just has regular draping slacks. I guess back in the day, the sculptors decided that when it came to these figures, more is more as opposed to less is more, so they felt the need to add all this additional sculpting to the legs when it really wasn't necessary in the first place. And then for no reasoning whatsoever, they've also added some mud caked to the bottom of his pant legs and covered all over poor Freddy's shoes. He does have peg holes on the undersides of his feet. Ironically enough, though, even though they do come with technically a stand, none of the stands are suited for holding the figures where you can actually attach them in place. Looking at this guy's articulation, well, I'll go ahead and run through that right now. His head rotates back and forth, but he's on a permanent angle. In other words, his head goes forward like this. He never really looks like he's looking straight up, as opposed to he's sort of always kind of looking like he's looming down. But it does rotate back and forth. Obviously, there's no ball joints happening on this figure. Swivel back and forth on the arms. That is the case on both arms. It's a little tight on this one arm here. He does have no hand articulation on this side, but he does have arm articulation on this side. You can just rotate the bicep. Again, this is something that a lot of the McFarlane pieces were doing back in the day, where you weren't getting symmetrical articulation on both sides of the figure. You may be given only like one hinge, for example, on one side, and then the other arm, for no apparent reason, would just have a swivel and additional articulation where you could do all the things on this side that you just couldn't do on this side here. Freddy also has waist articulation, and that's about it. That's all you're really going to get for the rest of the figure. Basic, yes. He is certainly something that, if you look at him now, Freddy feels very dated. If you were to pick up this piece, you probably would even question why the sculpting looks so bad. But again, that's the charming appeal of these pieces. Back in the day, you gotta believe that this was the only way that we could pick up a lot of horror figures, and sort of the dream team when you think about it. The fact that there was one toy line that encompassed characters like from Species, from Friday the 13th, from Nightmare on Elm Street, from Candyman, from Fly, from The Thing, and so on and so forth. You literally were having like the dream team of collectible figures. If you liked horror, back in the day, McFarlane Toys and the movie Maniacs line was really where it was at. So I hope this video has answered Scott's question as to the one figure that I could think of that defined my collecting, what got me back into collecting, and that was the movie Maniacs Series 1 Freddy Krueger. Crude by today's standards, yes, he has the very limited articulation that would be something you would expect to find with McFarlane's releases back in the day. The sculpting really wasn't the greatest, but there's a charm and appeal to this particular figure. I would not certainly consider it one of my all-time favorite figures, but it certainly has a warm spot in my heart because it was the figure that got me started into collecting again in my early, I guess I would have been in my early 20s when I started picking up these pieces on a regular basis. Not only was I collecting then movie Maniacs, but I was collecting, it seemed, everything that McFarlane was churning out, with some of my personal favorite things to collect back in the day, like the X-Files figures. Still wish I had those in my collection to this day. Disappointed in a way that I never ended up keeping that one Freddy, the thing that started my collecting days. I opened him up, and I think I bought a second one of him so I could keep him sealed on the shelf, and I ended up parting ways with all of them. What was I thinking? I probably was thinking, why would I even need to keep these anymore? Because then I entered into that second stage where I stopped collecting again, which was again then rejuvenated later on in life and has led us to the dance where we are to this day. So a virtual proverbial hat tipped to you, crude looking Freddy Krueger from movie Maniacs Series 1. It is because of you that I started collecting, and in a way it's because of you that I started this YouTube channel in the first place. So again, thank you. As basic as you may look in design, and it does look like you've bathed yourself in wet black oil, you're still a nice looking figure that I want to keep now in my collection. I have considered though the idea of maybe looking for another Freddy Krueger to see if I could find one in a closer paint scheme to the one that I first picked up so many years ago. Certainly a question to pose to you, members of the mob. What is the toy, the collectible, that got you into collecting? It may not be the initial toy when you were first growing up as a kid, but what was the figure that got you back into collecting now and has led you to the dance where you guys are right now? Let me know down below in the comments section. If you are also new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, turn on the bell notification, and keep your peepers peeled because there's going to be a whole lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.